As you may know, we've recently switched from our Nikon cameras over to the Panasonic GH5 to shoot all of our videos, and I have to say, this is by far my most favorite video camera that I have ever used. For our run and gun style of shooting, I really can't imagine anything much better than this. But there are just a few little quirks with this camera that Panasonic could easily fix with a simple update. And so in this video, I'm going to share with you the top 12 things that I wish Panasonic would fix in their next firmware update. As you may have heard, this camera is incredible for shooting slow-mo. Not only can you shoot 120 frames per second in 1080, you can also go all the way up to 180 frames per second. To do that though, you have to turn on variable frame rate, and when you do, autofocus is turned off. Now, I understand that the camera may not be capable of autofocusing while it records, but I never use autofocus while I'm recording. Instead, I use autofocus right before I hit record to line up the shot. And so it's very frustrating when we turn on variable frame rate and the autofocus doesn't work. We have to do everything manually. I know with just a very simple update, Panasonic could make autofocus work before recording in variable frame rate. Now let's talk about ISO. This camera does have pretty impressive ISO performance for the size of the sensor. And most of the time, I will shoot in full manual and I will choose my ISO myself. But sometimes, especially when I'm doing long takes outside and the lighting is constantly changing, I like to use auto ISO. The problem with auto ISO on this camera is that it no longer tells you what ISO the camera is choosing. It just says auto ISO on the back of the camera. As our light gets darker and darker, I want to know what my ISO is set to, even though I'm letting the camera have control. For instance, I may not want to go over ISO 3200, but if I'm in auto ISO, I have no idea. I may already be into ISO 6400. So I hope in the next firmware update, they will simply add that number back to the screen when I'm using auto ISO. This camera has some of the best features when it comes to manually focusing the camera. Not only does it have really great focus peaking, which helps you figure out what exactly is in focus, before you record, it will do a picture-in-picture. It will punch in, and as you turn the focus ring, you'll be able to see at 100% what you actually have in focus. The problem is that it no longer works when the camera is recording. Now, I understand you may not be able to zoom in past 100%. Maybe it won't be able to zoom in as far as it can before it starts recording. I understand that it only has so much processing power, but if we could have just a little bit of punch in, it would make manually focusing while we record that much easier. One thing I love about this camera is how much you can customize it. And on the top dial here, you can see we have 3 different C settings. And basically what these settings allow you to do is change every aspect of the camera so that you can just turn the knob and instantly change all of your camera's settings. This can be super helpful if you're shooting, let's say, inside and then outside, or you're shooting with a certain type of light and then you move to another type of colored light, or you're shooting in one frame rate and then you want to shoot slow-mo. You can easily change these around and instantly change your settings. The problem with these custom settings though is that you can't customize every aspect of what is controlled and what isn't. So for example, if I want to set my C1 to shoot in a slow-mo setting, I'm also going to have to lock in my white balance, my shutter speed, my ISO, all of those other settings that are going to completely change with every single shoot are always going to be reverted back to the first thing that I saved. If I have to replace a battery, all of those settings are going to revert back again to the original setting. If the camera goes to sleep, everything will revert back to the original setting. Panasonic needs to understand that there are some things that we want to lock in, for example, maybe the bit rate, or we want to lock in the frame rate. But when it comes to ISO and shutter speed and aperture and stuff like that, we may want to turn those off so that when we're changing these function buttons around, we're only affecting certain things, but not every single thing in the menu. I personally have found that I do not use these custom settings because it's very frustrating as I go from one to the other. If they gave us just a little bit more control over what would actually change in these custom settings, I would use them every day. Now, we've already talked about when we're shooting slow-mo with the variable frame rate, we lose the ability to autofocus. Well, something else that we lose is the ability to record audio. And that's a real bummer because sometimes I like shooting with a high frame rate because I want the ability to shoot in slow-mo. I might want to slow it down in post, but I may not want to. And so I would love for Panasonic to give me the option, at least in some frame rates, for me to record audio as well. We can already choose 4K at 60 frames per second and it records audio fine, but if I choose 4K at 24 frames per second and then I do variable frame rate to 60, it's shooting the exact same thing, now we lose audio. And that's a problem for us, and we tend to shoot slow-mo less than we normally would simply because we don't have the option of using that audio. This leads me to number 6, which is 48 frames per second at 4K. The camera can shoot 24, it can shoot 30, it can shoot 50, it can shoot 60, but for some reason right now, this camera cannot shoot 48 frames per second. And a lot of times, what videographers like us who shoot in 24 frames per second like doing is shooting at 48 frames per second, and we always have the ability to play it back at 100% speed, or we could play it back at half speed and have some slow motion. But right now, the only way to get that frame rate is to use variable frame rate, and then of course we lose the audio. So as this camera stands right now, we're not able to shoot in 48 frames per second and capture audio. Okay, number 7 is about lower bit rates. And I know most people watching this are going to say that I'm crazy because they want as high of a bit rate as possible, right? You want the highest quality possible. But for what we do a lot of the time, we're shooting very stationary subjects that don't require a ton of bit rate to get a really sharp video. And so for what we do, I would love the ability to shoot in 4K at 50 megabits per second, or even less if possible. If we could shoot in 1080 at less than 25 megabits per second, that would be great as well. But right now, if we want to shoot in 4K, we're stuck at 100 megabits per second, which for many of our projects is actually overkill. Obviously, if I was going to be shooting a moving subject, I would want the higher bit rate. But if we're shooting a stationary bottle for a tutorial and the camera's just gonna run for hours and hours and hours, I might wanna shoot in 4K so that I have the ability to crop in, but I also don't need to be shooting at 100 or 150 megabits per second. Now let's talk about the battery grip. I recently got battery grips for all 5 of our GH5s, and I really appreciate the way this thing is built. But there's 2 weird quirks about this thing which absolutely drive me crazy. First of all, the main reason to get a battery grip is so that you can double your battery life. We have 1 battery in the camera, 1 battery in the grip. The problem with this grip and the way that it works with the camera is though, when you're recording or when you're using the camera with 2 batteries, it's going to first start using the battery in the grip, just like it should. But I want to be able to hot swap that battery out while I'm using the camera or while I'm recording. And right now, if I take this battery out while I'm recording, the camera will shut off for a moment and then reconnect to this other battery inside the camera. The only way that I'm able to take this battery out while I'm recording is for this battery to totally die. The camera then switches over to the internal battery. Then I am able to take the dead battery out, put the new battery in, and while the camera continues to record, it will switch back to the battery grip just like it should. But it's pretty obvious to tell that if the camera can switch from the in-camera battery back to the grip battery without shutting off and stopping recording, it should be able to do it the other way as well. And you may be asking why I would want to do that, but we're shooting for hours at a time. And sometimes I want to swap out batteries before they are totally dead. Sometimes I just have an extra battery, or maybe I'm giving batteries to my entire crew and I'm saying, hey, just give me all your dead batteries. I'm gonna run in the other room and start charging them. But now with this system the way it is, we have to wait and wait and wait for the battery to switch over before we can actually take it out. It drives me crazy. Speaking of the battery grip and both batteries, here's one other strange thing that drives me crazy about this system. It doesn't tell me how much battery life I have in both the grip and the camera. When I have a battery in the grip, it does say BG and it gives me the battery life on this battery alone in the battery grip. But for me to see if I even have a battery in the camera or how much life is in the battery in the camera, I have to take this battery out, the camera will turn itself off, turn itself back on, and then it will tell me how much battery life I have left in this other battery. I find that very, very frustrating. I would like to see at all times how much battery life I have in both batteries. Now, I personally have never used one, but this camera allows you to shoot with an anamorphic lens using the entire sensor with a 3:4 aspect ratio. Now, what you can do in post is you can stretch that footage out and you can create really cinematic looking footage. This is how they get those crazy horizontal lens flares in all of the movies and music videos that you've seen. The problem is that this camera currently is not able to stretch or de-squeeze the footage. And so if you're actually going to be using this camera to record with anamorphic lenses, you're going to have to look at the footage all scrunched up on the back of the camera. I'm sure that with a simple firmware update, they would be able to stretch it out on the screen so that you would be able to see what it looks like when you actually get back to the computer and edit the footage. Number 11. This camera has some of the most impressive stabilization that I have ever seen before. Using this camera for running and gunning is so convenient. I absolutely love it. But you guys have probably heard and seen that there's a little bit of a problem with this camera if you walk with it and you try to get really steady footage. There's this sway. It kind of goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And for 95% of what we're shooting, we don't walk with this camera without using a gimbal, so it really doesn't matter. But if there was some way that Panasonic could just tweak it a little bit so that not only could you use it handheld for, you know, panning and tilting like we do now, it works so well for that, but just take that sway away just a little bit more so that we could actually walk with this camera without using a gimbal, that would be absolutely amazing. Number 12, and finally, this is the big one, and I'm not totally sure that it can be done with a firmware update, but I hope that they can improve continuous autofocus. I have never myself used continuous autofocus before while recording. I just find it to be a little bit too unreliable in any camera that I've ever tested, but I have seen some cameras, the Sony cameras, the Canon 80D, that are capable of recording with incredible accuracy with continuous autofocus so that you can make videos like this by yourself. You don't need a camera person. We're lucky enough here at Fstoppers where I have somebody here who's recording on this camera. He's making sure that everything is in focus. But if Panasonic was able to get their autofocus to the level it is before you hit record so that it could keep everything in focus, maybe it could track faces a little bit better, that would be absolutely amazing. And I would start using continuous autofocus. But for me right now, it's not a huge loss because I've never actually used it before anyway. Well guys, thank you so much for watching this. We will send this over to Panasonic as well, and I think they might listen. I think they might give us some of these things because at least a few of the items in this list I think will be incredibly easy for them to fix with just a simple firmware update. Head over to fstoppers.com to see more free content like this every single day, and head over to fstoppers.com/store to check out our premium tutorials.